All right, so we have finally reached that point in the semester where we get to talk about animals. Now, I know for most bio majors, animals are where it gets interesting, but please keep in mind all of the things we've discussed so far: viruses, bacteria, the protists, the fungi, and the plants. All of those different organisms, those different groups, are absolutely essential for the survival of an animal. You can't have an animal without food. You can't have the producer base without the decomposers. You can't have life existing in a little vacuum. So animals tend to be really neat, interesting, and fun, and there's some great stuff here, but everything's connected. That's the ecological theme I want you guys to keep remembering and keep approaching when we talk about this spectrum of diversity. All right, so let's talk about animals and take a look at what is special about animals, what's unique and different, what make animals different than the other groups. And we've talked about a lot of protists. Some of them eat things. They have certain features that kind of almost make them seem like an animal. But when we look at animals, there are three common features that we see across all animals. Okay, so these are the big three I want you guys to be comfortable with. This is what says, all right, this is an animal compared to possibly a protist, or is it a new group that we might need to be classifying? Okay, so first common feature here. Animals are multicellular. They are made up of a whole bunch of cells. So that's where the protists kind of get moved into their own category. We don't see multicellular protists that have these other additional features. Okay, heterotropic. So yes, we do have multicellular protists, but make sure I spell this right. PH, sorry. Heterotropic. We have multicellular protists, but those are not heterotropic. Now, heterotropic is a fancy word for eats stuff. They eat things. They obtain their energy by consuming pre-built organic molecules. So are wolves eating the deer? Wolves are multicellular. They're eating the deer. The deer is multicellular. It was eating plant material earlier in the day before the wolves got to it. And then the third common feature across all animals is that they lack a cell wall. Animals will not have a cell wall when we look at their cell structures. So these are the three common features found across all the animals that are currently classified under Kingdom Animalia. Now let's be really realistic. There's a lot of variation once we get beyond this. There's lots of other features that make animals different from other groups of organisms we've talked about, and things that make animals different from each other. So some of the additional features, and this list is just a small snapshot. Animals, by and large, have some form of active movement. Oh, that should be active. So, we see our little gazelle running across the grasslands there. We see the hydra pulsating and grabbing food. But what about a barnacle? What about a sponge? At some point in the life cycle, there is movement of the animal. Some animals move their entire lives. Other animals move during early portions of their life cycle, and then they become what we call sessile, meaning they don't move a whole lot. All right, but that's a feature across the animals. And there's a wide diversity in body form. So the shape, the body form, and we're going to talk about diversity in shape and body plans as we go through these different features of animals. Okay, so these are the big general features, and then these additional features. We'll also see animals can live in a wide diversity of habitats. So there's our polar bear. It's adapted. It has evolved to a specific habitat. Now, sadly, the polar bear is moving closer to extinction because climate change is eliminating its habitat. The polar caps are melting. The ice packs are not freezing up as large, and its habitat is shrinking, which leads to decreased reproductive success and populations getting smaller. So diversity of habitats is a great thing when we look at the animals across the planet, but as those habitats decrease, those animals get pushed close to extinction or into extinction. Animals also can reproduce sexually. We got our lions, but then also asexual. Now we'll go into some examples of that as we go through different animal groups. So remember, I'm going to keep pounding this idea into you, keep trying to reinforce it. If you can switch back and forth between reproductive methods, sexual, asexual, when you're stressed, sexual is best because it gives you genetic diversity. When environments are good and everything's great and it's easy, I just want to clone myself. And that's where animals will go into this asexual reproduction mode, if they have the ability to switch back and forth. Plenty of animal species do not have that ability, though. So that is, to a certain extent, a limitation of the animal world, that they don't have that diversity of reproductive methods. And by and large, most of them are limited to just sexual reproduction. So other things we want to talk about for animals. Let's look at the embryonic development. All animals go through a series of steps, and we'll go over this in more detail. But they go through a series of steps during embryonic development. So you start with your egg and sperm coming together for fertilization, and then you create this multi-celled structure, and it walks through this process. So let me get my little pen out. So you start here, the zygote has formed. That's your egg and sperm connecting. Give them a little happy face. There it is. That is now your full genetic material. You are diploid. 2N. Yay! There we go. Give you a little happiness. Okay, then the genetics of animal development, say, start to divide. You're going to go through cell division. 1 cell turns into 2, 2 turn into 4, 4 into 8. As you're doing this, you're going through, officially the process is known as cleavage, and you're dividing and dividing and dividing and dividing. You eventually divide and build up enough cells to form a thing known as the blastula. This is a hollow ball formed of all these cells that were created during the cleavage process. The blastula, inside of it, will have a structure known as the blastocele form. There's this little ball of cells here. In embryological development, you'll hear it called the intercellular mass, ICM. Ooh, ICM. That is what will eventually develop into the individual. All right, so then we move down this step to gastrulation, and this is where this ball, the blastula, starts to indent, and you see this indentation here. That indentation grows and grows and grows and pushes all the way up, and eventually, depending on the type of animal you are, that indentation could become your mouth or it could become your butt. That's going to be a variation or difference between animal groups. What forms first, your mouth or your anus? And that's where we'll get into a group of animals, or two groups, protostomes and deuterostomes. So we're going to come back to this embryological development process, but animals are all following a very similar pattern. So you look up here at the embryos, and imagine if you had this group of embryos here, and at this level of development, you're told, tell me what they're going to become. They all kind of look pretty similar. There's a lot of relatedness to them, but each of them will go down a different embryological development line and eventually develop into the organisms down here. So compare a human versus these others. Not huge differences there. Okay, that's because we all, as animals, use the same basic developmental genes to go down this developmental path because we all evolved from a common ancestor. So, all right, another big feature of animals when we look at them, the body plan is composed of tissues. So the animal body is made up of tissues, specialized cells working together to create a tissue. Tissues work together to create larger structures. We go to the organ. Organs create organ systems, and you build up the body of the animal that way. So think about our body and how many different tissue types we have in it. You have your skin, your bone, your hair, your blood, your cartilage, your connective tissue, all sorts of diversity within the tissue types of animals. And they're specialized. That's the big key thing there. So, all right, so now when we look at the body plan of an animal, this is going to be an important one to remember. So let me give you guys kind of a big red star. Hopefully everybody notices the big red under, or big red LO. This is a big characteristic of animals, is how your body plan evolves. You don't get to choose it. Nothing we decide on. It's pre-programmed into our genetics. Some animals have a body plan that's known as radial symmetry. So I want you guys to think about a tire or a pie. You got a pie in front of you, or a pizza, a round pizza, and you chop it in half. And then you change directions and chop it in half again and again and again. So you got your circle here. If you cut it in half, cut the radius of the circle, cut it this way, cut it that way, cut it this way, etc., it's always going to be the same. You're going to see the same features no matter which direction you cut it. Some animals exhibit this radial symmetry or radial body plan. Other animals exhibit what's called bilateral symmetry. Now, bilateral symmetry changes the game. You cut at a different angle. I'm going to cut the squirrel down the middle this way. Now I got the tail on one side, I have the head on another. I'm going to cut it through the head this way, what's called the sagittal plane, and I have the right paw on one side, left paw on the other, where it's kind of mirror images. I cut the squirrel through the middle, this one here, what's known as the frontal plane. Now I have the top of the squirrel up here and the paws are on the bottom. It changes the game when you have an animal with bilateral symmetry. What bilateral symmetry allows for is this really big specialization of body parts. Radial symmetry, not so much. Everything's kind of the same no matter which direction you're cutting it, but bilateral, increased specialization means increased mobility, increase all sorts of things, increase when you're dealing with a bilateral animal body plan. Okay, so those are the two general symmetries. When we get into a thing known as cephalization, meaning you have a head region, game changes even more, because now you have neural tissue usually specialized and concentrated in that area, and all of a sudden, we now have a significant increase in functionality when you have cephalization. So, okay, so a couple big things to remember, kind of tie this together. Radial body plan animals are often sessile, meaning they don't move. Or we could say they are, if we're talking about marine animals, they're planktonic. Remember plankton? Remember zooplankton, phytoplankton? Hopefully it's familiar. They just kind of float around and go with the flow, not a lot of real directional movement. So the jellyfish kind of just moves around with the current. Animals with a bilateral body plan are often much more mobile, much more active, because you have greater specialization to be very, very active and mobile. Okay, so let's lock that stuff in. Lecture part 2, we'll pick up talking a little bit about tissues and developmental processes of the animal body plan.